Hello and welcome to our short webinar on effective communication. This is an abridged version of the CQF Level 2 award that we normally deliver to our professional care staff. We've changed it so that it is more useful for you as informal carers. We hope that you find it useful. Remember though that some of the information here might not be directly applicable to you, but will certainly be of use if you also have the support of paid carers. As regular webinar attendees will know, we like to be clear about the aim and objectives of our webinars. The aim here is quite simple. We hope to help you develop your knowledge and skills to help you communicate more effectively with the person you care for, and if you use professional carers, to understand the ways in which they should be communicating with the person they care for. We also like to be clear about the objectives. This allows you to understand what we are trying to cover in the webinar. In this webinar, we're looking at the following things. Firstly, identifying why we communicate. Secondly, identifying individual needs, wishes and preferences. Thirdly, looking at any barriers there might be to communication. And fourthly, looking at the importance of confidentiality. Now, this last one is probably less significant to you as an informal carer, but it's still important. So let's have a look at communication. Why and how do we communicate? Now, communication comes in many forms and we communicate for many different reasons. We communicate to persuade, we communicate to impart information or even to give an order. We communicate to seek information. We communicate to express our emotions, whether that be joy, fear, sorrow or satisfaction. In this webinar, we'll be looking at some of the ways in which we communicate. They may be verbal, not only what we say, but how we say it. They may be non-verbal, what we understand and transmit through our body language. We're also going to look at observation and how you can be receptive to reactions when communicating. And we're also going to take a look at effective listening skills. If we look at the construction of communication, it can often come as quite a surprise. I'm sure you've heard sayings such as actions speak louder than words. It's not what you say, but the way that you say it. But looking at this pie chart shows why these sayings are so accurate and give a real insight into what we should think about when communicating. Only 7% of our communication is linked to the words we are saying. 38% is linked to the tone in which we are saying something. And over half is linked to our body language. So let's have a look at verbal communication. As we've said before, it's about both words and tone. Remember, this is normally for our professional carers, so might not be completely appropriate to you, but these things are always worth bearing in mind. When you are thinking about your communication, it's important that you use words that are age appropriate. Professional, probably not necessary in your situation. Clear and unambiguous. Words that promote dignity. Words that are respectful. It's also important to think about your pitch, your tone and your volume. It's also important to think about non-verbal communication. What's involved in non-verbal communication? Well, it can include loads of things, such as your use of personal space, use of your hands, your posture, the look in your eyes, the look on your face, your lips, your head, touch, gesture, body language. And of course it can also include the use of sign languages such as Makaton. When communicating with people, it is really important to get an idea of their needs, their wishes and their preferences. If you use paid care staff, which I know many people do, it's important that they take the following into account. They should always ask people about themselves and really listen to the answers. They should observe people's behaviour. They should think about the different needs of the individual. These might be medical conditions such as dementia, but they might be religious, cultural or language preferences as well. We all know communication can be hard and there can be many barriers to good communication. Some of the barriers are obvious, many of course are not. For instance, if you've not identified a person's wishes or preferences, that can lead immediately to poor communication. If you use inappropriate vocabulary, especially jargon, this doesn't help. You need to think about how you construct your sentences. Long and complicated sentences can lead to poor communication. Obviously, you need to think about your personal space, posture, facial expressions to make sure that they're appropriate as well. And of course, there are always environmental factors to consider, such as background noise or light. Here's something you might find interesting called the Battari Box. This explains how attitude and behaviour affect others and vice versa. As well as influencing our words, attitude will, more importantly, influence our body language. For example, if someone shouts at you, you're more likely to shout back, which will make the first person shout even more, and so on. Understanding how attitude and behaviour affects others is important in all communication. In the Battari Box theory, human attitude and behaviour are linked to each other. This simple round diagram shows how attitude and behaviour are connected. So we know that communication is complicated, but then so is listening. A process that can really help your communication is active listening. Active listening is about doing a whole lot more than just listening to the words that are being spoken. It's about paying attention. It's about showing you're listening. It's about checking and reflecting, not interrupting, and then responding. Next time you're communicating with someone, try some active listening. Think about the following factors that can aid that listening: your body language, eye contact, your facial expression, allowing time for them to speak, making encouraging sounds, allowing pauses, and allowing silence. And as well as thinking about the factors that can aid communication, always remember those things that can be barriers. Remember, these are some of the barriers to listening. Comparing. You're thinking, I wouldn't have said it like that. Mind reading. You're one step ahead of what the other person is really thinking and feeling. Rehearsing. You're focused on what you're going to say next, how you're going to say it, and you're not thinking about what the individual's saying to you. Filtering. You pay attention to some things and comments but you consider important, and this often happens when dealing with older patients who repeat themselves. Judging. This is a case of don't confuse me with the facts, I've already made up my mind. Dreaming. Something that the other person says triggers a chain of thoughts of your own which may not be relevant. Advising. You are the great problem solver, ready with help and suggestions. You don't have to hear more than a few sentences before you begin searching for the right answer. You probably have people saying yes but to you, a sign that it's your idea and not theirs. Sparring. This has you arguing and disagreeing. You disagree so quickly that the other person never feels heard. You take strong stands and are very clear about your beliefs, values and preferences. Being right. You will go to any lengths to avoid being wrong. You can't listen to critics, be corrected or take suggestions for change. Derailing. You suddenly change the subject. You derail the train of conversation when bored or uncomfortable. You can sometimes just joke it off. Placating. Right, yes, absolutely. You want to be nice, pleasant and supportive. You want people to like you. You half listen, probably enough to get the drift, but you keep your distance from the person. And finally, identifying. Something similar happened to me. You constantly refer what the person is saying to your own experience, not to theirs. We've talked about active listening, but how do you make sure that you've been understood? There are a couple of ways of doing this. Firstly, verbal affirmation. In other words, response or questions to clarify understanding, either from the person communicating or the person being communicated to. There are also non-verbal ways of doing this. For example, gestures, signs, body language. So, as an example of some of these ways, reflecting, for instance, is when you repeat the same words the person has used, such as, you would like to go to the cinema? Clarifying is when you need to recap and check your understanding. So, you'd like to go to the cinema tomorrow. Reinforcement and encouragement, words such as, yes, Do go on. And then paraphrasing, using your words to reflect back, such as, you'd like to go to the cinema this week? I do want to talk for a bit about confidentiality. While this might not feel immediately relevant to you as an informal carer, it will be relevant if you have professional carers, and is an important issue to understand. For our purposes, confidentiality is the protection of personal information and not sharing that information about people without their knowledge and agreement. The importance of confidentiality can be seen in the amount of legislation which covers it, especially in social care. Here's a list, but I'm not going to go through these now in a way that we would if we were delivering training to professional care staff. But it is important to be aware of the key issues, especially if you're also dealing with others who may be involved in the care of the person you care for. The following is important to note. Any information volunteered by a supported person should only be used for the purpose in which it was given. This includes both written and spoken word. It is still applicable even when a supported person has died, and anything learned about a person in the course of an individual's work is completely confidential. It's important that confidentiality is maintained at all times. For that reason, it's important to remember that information should only be disclosed or accessible to people immediately involved in the person's care. Care and support can be discussed, but only in an appropriate place and with the appropriate people, and care must be taken with any records. Of course, as with many things, there are limits to confidentiality, but these are carefully set out. Disclosure with consent may be considered if it is in the individual's interest, if there's a serious risk to the community, if there's been a serious crime or if the risks of one exists, and in the case of an official or legal investigation. Finally, I just want to mention some of the services that might be able to help you. There are charities and support groups such as the British Deaf Association, the Carers Direct Helpline, and of course Age UK. There are translation services, interpreting services, and speech and language services that support people who have had a stroke and have problems with their speech. There are also advocacy services for people who are unable to represent themselves. This service tries to understand the needs, wishes and preferences of people and will argue on their behalf. We do hope that you found this short webinar on communication for carers useful. If you need support with communication, please do contact us to find out what help we can give you via our adult carers team. Thanks very much for listening.